I'm definitely finding a balance. And, I think what I found is like creative work has to, excuse me for the yawn. Speaking of, tired during the day from
Yeah.
work and training, constantly sleepy. But I have to get my creative work done in the morning or it will not get done or it won't get done at least effectively. Like some people are like, yeah, I need to run to get my creative juices going. And I'm just the opposite. Like, I cannot be creative if I've already run. It's like expelled all my creative energy. So, yeah, it's so interesting. Um, and it's been a balance that I have not mastered. I'm definitely, I'd like to think that I have a long way to go in my pro career.
This episode of the Smart Athlete Podcast is brought to you by Solpre. If you're active at all, whether you're running or simply out walking for the day, you've probably experienced one of the number one problems that active people have, and that's chafing. Solpre's all-new, all-natural anti-chafe balm solves that problem while feeding your skin the vital nutrients it needs to be healthy. If you'd like to stop chafing once and for all and treat your body right, go to solpri.com to check out the anti-chafe balm today. That's SOLPRI.com. Welcome to the Smart Athlete Podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Funk. My guest today is, interestingly, a former kindergarten teacher. We're going to ask her about that. Currently, a pro ultra runner. She has numerous wins over the years, including the Western States 100. In 2018, she was the first American at UTMB. As well as qualified for the Olympic trials in the marathon that year. You can find her on Instagram at CatBeRad. Welcome to the show, Kat Bradley.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. If you're just listening to the audio version, you're missing out on Kat's cool background, which is actually her van because she's on the road getting ready to head out and race and kind of on the trail, so to speak. No pun intended. Trying to train and travel and do all the things that a pro runner is obligated to do at some time. So if you have the opportunity, check her out on Instagram. Say thank you for being able to be here for this episode because making accommodations on the road is not always the easiest thing.
Oh, thanks. The van makes it way easier, I'll tell you. I had a built-out minivan before this. Big one. It was way more difficult.
So before we got going, you had mentioned something about, being on the road, trying to hit like all your sponsor obligations before you're getting to races. I guess one of the things I want to ask you about is, generally speaking, life as a pro, but then also, what that looks like in meeting the sponsors' obligations. Because I think from the outside looking in, many people will look at, say, the life of a pro and go, isn't that awesome? Like, you just get to run a lot, you get to focus on training. And I don't know as much of the intricacies as a pro runner. I know a little bit more about pro triathletes, but I know many of them do their best to like work another job and train. And sometimes it can be difficult to be a pro endurance athlete.
Yeah, totally. And, I did it as a full-time pro right after Western States. I was a kindergarten teacher and had this opportunity and I was like, I'm going to take it. And then just a financial burden. I had a retainer for my sponsors and I had, and I have other financial support from other sponsors. But it still is just, the sport's small and still in trail running. It's not enough even, winning the biggest race in the world, Western States, it's still small. So I have been working quite a bit still, doing a bunch of 1099 stuff, contract work for other brands and sometimes for the brands that I'm affiliated with as an athlete. And then, doing other stuff to, I'm doing this super cool film project with Brooks this year that doesn't, I'm not getting paid for that. It's a cool opportunity to tell my story tell about my life, and then also talk about, and then it's also more eyes on stuff that I'm doing, and will open doors elsewhere if I ever decide that, professional running is, too taxing on the body and mind. So, um, got a lot of fires going, so to speak.
I definitely understand that mentality. Is like, I don't know how I'm in the middle of like maybe 6 different product launches, and this brand and another brand, and it's basically just me with a little bit of assistance, and just running all of the different threads at the same time can be taxing mentally to try to keep track of it. And then,
Totally.
like my mileage is nothing compared to what you're doing now. Like I'm doing like 25, 30 miles a week nowadays versus like when I was doing triathlon more seriously, trying to become a pro, putting in, 15, 20-hour weeks, which was good for me. That's about as far as I got. But just, I have some inclination about the fatigue level, just your brain goes through after all of it. And you're like, I can't, at least I couldn't, I guess, think straight enough to like do creative work or, do any of that, like kind of
Yeah,
higher level thinking.
I'm definitely finding a balance. And, I think what I found is like creative work has to, excuse me for the yawn. Speaking of, tired during the day from
Yeah.
work and training, constantly sleepy. But I have to get my creative work done in the morning or it will not get done, or it won't get done at least effectively. Like some people are like, yeah, I need to run to get my creative juices going. And I'm just the opposite. Like I cannot be creative if I've already run. It's like it expelled all my creative energy. So yeah, it's so interesting. And it's been a balance that I have not mastered. I'm definitely, I'd like to think that I have a long way to go in my pro career. And, I'm learning how to balance that. And I kind of, after being, as a teacher, I wasn't making that much money. And then as my first few years as pro athlete, just living well below the poverty line, trying to make ends meet. I just got so tired of that I took on a ton of work. You kind of get famine mentality about work and stuff, and now, I'm just trying to balance that and also realize like, okay, where do my priorities lay? And I think, I'm kind of deciding as I stabilize, like, okay, I still care a lot about running. I need to let some things go, but I can't go all in on just running again, unless, I have a fat contract. But, that's just not where the sport is yet.
Yeah. Do you find yourself, so I know, I guess I'll say early, I did not have the talent, I guess you have. Obviously, you put in the work, so I'm not trying to downplay that, but there is, some potential that can't be overcome in terms of genetics, I think. So I knew for myself, I wasn't going to be a top pro in triathlon. It was just something I wanted to do as a challenge. But I knew you needed to put in the hours. I took like a low paying retail job to have the flexibility and time to train. And then kind of was like doing like, I refer to it as the Craigslist hustle, but like buying used electronics and refurbishing them. And during that time, making, like poverty line issue type pay, maybe $15,000 a year or something like that. And I remember struggling with the mentality. I think you mentioned like the famine mentality, like where's the money going to come from? Like what, like,
Yeah.
am I going to find enough? Am I going to be able to make my bills, all that kind of stuff? Do you like struggle with that, or have you come to a place where you're like, I guess I don't know, for me if it was a matter of just like cognitive dissonance where I just decided this, but I eventually got to a place of like, I guess, trusting life and just being like, like I'll figure it out. But is that something
Yeah.
you go through?
I'm not like constantly stressed about it anymore, you know, but I will say that it's something that, you know, I'm very recently recognizing that I have to, in order to be a successful athlete, that I have to just let go of that mentality. And I can't say yes to every single work, you know, that comes there's a lot of paid opportunities that aren't necessarily running focus, that are brand focus, you know, brand building, because of my, you know, I have been in the industry for a long time. My name is well known and, you know, enough in the sport, and I you know, have a lot of connections, and I just know trail running so well. And it, you know, it's just so funny. I you know, I have to just learn to let these opportunities roll off me if I really want to keep running professionally. You know, that's something I've learned in the last 2 years. It's just like, as you said, I can't do both, you know.
I think sometimes it's like, especially as more opportunities come your way, and I think as you kind of build your notoriety or build your following, or you know, however you want to phrase it, like more and more things kind of come your way. I found, I guess, going from that place of like, oh God, where's the next opportunity coming from, to, as things transition to like things are going well, now there's more and more, now people are reaching out for different reasons
Yeah.
between me and you, clearly. But just like, I found there was a period of time where it was hard to say no, where it was like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like a new learned skill where you had to be able to go like, I think as you mentioned, like, no, I like, this isn't quite aligned with like where I want to go.
Totally. And I'm you know, learning that lesson, and because of that, like, some of the opportunities that I said yes to, like, I'm one to stick to my guns, and like, I'm gonna see it out. But, you know, it's having to see it out has made me recognize that I just have to be a lot more careful with my time, you know, especially, again, I'll say it again because it's so important. Training and racing at a high level is so energy intensive, both mentally and physically. It's just like, you know, and when I was a little younger, I didn't recognize that. It's just like, I look back at when I was teaching and getting my master's and training for Western States. It was just like, you know, I did that and it was so amazing. But after Western States, I was so burnt out. And I think it took me a lot of time to come back mentally from that. I didn't have a race that I was like that fired up again about for a long time. So yeah, just like choosing where that energy goes is important.
So when I think about like energy, I mean, you're on the road now. Again, I kind of relate to like my own struggles, but I know I find it more difficult if I'm traveling to race, let alone being in a van with my significant other and dog on the way to a race. I find it harder to get in good food, like quality nutrition, and do all that planning. How do
Yeah.
you tackle that challenge?
So luckily, you know, my partner, who's also an athlete, he he's an excellent cook. We have a full kitchen in the van, and he
Okay.
will make sure that we get the food in. So that actually, you know, for the first time ever, like when I was teaching, that was a huge problem because I didn't cook, you know. And now, you know, it's just so awesome to have a partner that, you know, has really stepped up and recognized, like, right now, he's like a brilliant guy who could be doing anything in the world. And right now he's like doing all our van laundry, you know. So because you know, and he's really taken on a lot of that load. And that's really, you know, that's really important to all of this. And that's, you know, and you know, he's chasing his own dreams too. It works out. He's a professional photographer, so like, you know, which is a hard industry to crack.
Mm-hmm.
And he's doing it. But you know, we're both like step up where when we need to. But you know, nutrition. Luckily, he's a great cook. So, and I'm a terrible cook, so it works out.
I mean, I feel like the best partnerships, regardless of whether they're romantic or business wise, is you find somebody who is strong in the things you're weak at, and then you don't step on each other's toes, and you help like fill in the gaps where the other person's not so great.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, it is. And that has really showed here, in this partnership.
Yeah. I want to jump back a little bit in your running career. I want to ask you a little bit about burnout because I think it's something that most people who run for a period of time will deal with, especially if they're competition focused. Um,
Hmm.
whether it be, as you mentioned, kind of like a little bit of burnout after like the Western States where you didn't really feel motivated by any race, you didn't have that fire, whether we go back to like track time where you were kind of burnt out from collegiate, post collegiate environment. Um, can you just talk me through how you, maybe what you went through, and then like how you approach avoiding that burnout nowadays?
Yeah, I've been burnt out like so many times where I've taken most recently, like after 2020, I took 9 weeks off running completely, like uninjured, just like I want nothing to do with it. And in that, I don't recommend getting to that point and then taking that amount of time off like that. You know, you have to, but like I do also recommend if you have to get to that point, do it. Like if you are at that point where you're like, I don't want to get out the door, not just today, but like every day this month, I haven't wanted to get out the door. Like that's a sign, you know. You should at least want to. You should at least be excited for your run sometimes. Um, and my recommendation is like first, like evaluate all the stress in your life. You know, our bodies, our cortisol levels, like recognize all stress. So if you're like, say your kid is sick, you're fighting with your husband, like, you know, something went terrible at work, that's all stress that's going to have a physiological impact on your body and your mind. Like if you're that day, if you're wanting to get out on that day, great. um, but if you are not, listen to that. If you're like, I don't want to run today, so important to listen to that. And it just can be a slippery slope because it turns into every day. um, but if it turns into every day, then maybe find something else that you like too. Then maybe running is not the sport for you. I think that's so important to listen to that and listen to that gut, because then you won't enjoy what you're doing. And like, I've gone through such long periods of time where I've hated running, and yet running has been the thing that I've loved the most my whole life. And to like dread every single run for big periods of time, that is just like the biggest form of, you know, torture I can think of. And and there's way clear things that I could have done to mitigate that. Like, trying to come back from races too quickly, that is a sign that, that'll contribute to burnout. To not managing stress outside of running properly, or or not recognizing it as a stress that will affect your run stress. Like that's all really, it's, you're not just a runner when you're running, like you're a whole person all the time, and it all, one affects the other. And, you know, if you're burnt out in life, it will seep over to running. um, you should be at least looking forward to most of your runs.
One of the things I think is maybe difficult to learn, or I think a lot of us learn the hard way, is like paying attention to the right kind of signals that like our brain and body are sending us. Like this morning, or I guess if you're listening, then it's last week's episode. But as I'm recording here this morning, talking to Kate Galliette, we were talking about like signals and feedback, like how we're constantly feeding our body signals. If we're running, it's the signals of um, you know the resistance against the road or the trail, and all these different things. And our body gives us feedback about, okay, that's too hard, or maybe it's not hard enough, or whatever. And then we get that mental feedback of like, oh, like I don't want to do it. Like, I don't want to be here. I don't want to go out. But I think because many people, I think especially ultra runners, not to pick on you too much, Kat, and your kin, but got to have a little bit of a type A personality, right? Where you're like, got to get it done, got to put in the time. You know, it doesn't matter that I'm tired. And because you're so
Yeah.
strong in that mentality, that it's easy to blow past that signaling of like, maybe like you need a little bit more rest. So I think
Yeah,
it's
and it's
difficult to
also,
learn.
yeah, and even if you're listening to that signaling and you recognize it, there's just like super toxic guilt around sport that if you're not following the training plan to the T, then you're failing.
Yeah.
And you're actually failing if you don't listen to yourself and to your body. Like if you just take a deep breath, like your gut knows what is right. I'm a firm believer in that. If you just like take a few deep breaths and sit with it and think about it, like what should I actually do right now? Is this run going to set me over? Or is this run, am I just like kind of pushing back and finding excuses not to start? Because there is that too. Like sometimes I like find every excuse in the world not to run, and my partner's like, get out the door, you know, and I'm grateful for it. But there's a difference, and like if we reflect, we'll know that, we'll feel that. And it just, you know, it just takes that self-reflection, and that self-reflection takes practice because it's uncomfortable.
I think the tough part of the situation, which you're kind of talking about, is like you said, it's like kind of like sussing out the difference between that I don't want to go, but I'm fine, and the I don't want to go because I'm really not fine. Because they're both like that internal monologue going, yeah, don't do it. And it's hard. Like, I don't know that like our partners or our family or our friends, I don't know that it's always easy to see. It's not like there's a big bright red button on our forehead going,
Totally.
overworked. You know, it's so much more subtle than that, which I think
Yeah.
makes it that much more dangerous.
Yeah, it really does. It really does. And it also is dangerous because, like, you know, you can make that decision and, you know, even if it was the right decision, immediately spiral, you know, and then that spiral of like, oh my God, I didn't follow my training plan. What will my coach say? Or what's going to happen at this race? It's only 8 weeks away. Like, you know, that mentality, you know, and I think that's just very, you know, that's like a Western mentality, you know, there's just like movement going on in the rest of the, you know, of people like, hey, dude, like it's okay to take your day off. Like you don't have to feel guilty about taking a day off if you need to sit on the couch and read all day. You know, that is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And like, I think hopefully that mentality will start to bleed into running because like, you know, it's a, you know, you're not a failure if you need the rest. Like that's, you know, that's out of your control. You know, and again, I'll say it, you know, you're a failure if you don't listen to that. And like, you know, and even you're not a failure, that's too harsh, but you know, you will, you know, that's where you'll suffer consequences, both long term and short term.
I want to see if you relate to this. I felt like you talked about guilt for not getting a run in, or what will my coach say. I definitely had, I mean, for the longest time, a big appreciation for my coaches, but also like almost like a need to please them. And this is like much more younger me, say like high school, college, maybe early post college. Nowadays, it's much more of a conversation with my coach. Um, do you feel like you've ever been in that mentality, or do you see that with anybody you've maybe worked with?
100%. I think, you know, yeah, I, you know, I like to think um, that the athletes that I coach, you know, I really tell them like, hey, I'm just a human too. I'm just an athlete. I have the same shit. That's how I know how to deal with it, and that's where I can help you. So I hope, and I like to think that my athletes feel like they can come to me with everything. But I have been in that trap where you want to please your coach, and it is totally intoxicating. And that I've been in that, especially as you said, younger me in my high school and collegiate career, and even my early trail running career, of just having to please my coach and needing that praise. And that is something that I think is we need to unteach that in young athletes, especially because that severely damaged my early career. Especially, that's a whole nother, we can have like a whole nother podcast on this, but that's how dopers are created, and like the Nike project or whatever, is they just want to please their coach, and their coach comes to them, and it's already a power dynamic. And sorry if I'm going off this tangent, but like, I've seen it, and I've been around it, and I've also, as a collegiate athlete, my collegiate coach was like, you gotta lose some weight, and it ruined my collegiate career, and that was all to please, that coach. So like, I totally have felt that, and that goes into the guilt, but it also is this whole other issue about how to tackle that, because it's, it's a one thing to look up to your coach, and it's one thing to like, go by your coach's law. It's okay to ask questions, to your coach. And in fact, I think most coaches will like that, because it means you're taking ownership of your training. It means you're interested and you're empowered. But that's a whole nother topic and a can of worms that I honestly don't really want to get into, because it's super charged, obviously.
Yeah.
But I do think that, yes, I can relate to that. And I think that every young athlete can. And I think every young female athlete especially has some crazy story about some crazy coach situation where they, and I'm sure a lot of male athletes do too. But,
Well, what I was going to say is, like, I've had this conversation, I mean, recently with several, I don't know how, like, several times over the several years I've been doing this show. I don't know that I've yet had this conversation with a male athlete of their coach being like, you need to lose some weight. And often, not often, but the time I have this conversation with female athletes, it's often ends up to like some kind of eating disorder. And then that leads to injury and overtraining and burnout. And then like this whole like mental health spiral. Not everybody ends up down the whole, trail of tears kind of situation, but just like it was a bad reference, but it seems like from my very small sample size that I would give some very serious weight to it being much more a coach and female athlete problem than a male athlete problem.
Yeah, and I don't think that's totally, I think there are a lot of male athletes who have suffered in similar ways, whether it be weight or drugs. I think that's, again, how a lot of dopers are born is, and I just have such sympathy for them. Knowing myself as a younger athlete, I was on the track to chase pro track dreams, when I was recruited. And I can see my younger self, if a coach that I really looked up to was like, this is the way you win, and endorsed it, I can see myself falling in that trap, only out of wanting to please this coach and perform well. So, and I know that's the case for a lot of male athletes, and I don't, it's not excusable for dopers. It's just like, it's such a sad trap. Like, I just feel bad for young athletes, like in the Nike project and whatever else, not necessarily the ones who found it and later in their career, but for the 18 or 21-year-olds who are starting their pro career and are told this is the only way to go. That's sad, because then they're careers ruined. They have to live with that for the rest of their life, and that is sad. But again, off topic.
That's kind of the name of this show, is Off Topic. That's kind of, I should probably change the name of the show to Off Topic, because that's exactly what I do all the time. Speaking of off topic, now I've lost my train of thought to go off of this topic. We're talking about, who knows? I don't know. Another thing I wanted to ask you about, that I do remember that I actually have down. I wanted to ask about, because over the years you've had, a number of notable wins, FKTs, losing FKTs, trying to regain FKTs. That how do you stay focused on the interior race? What I mean is, like, just racing yourself instead of racing the clock or racing an opponent, or do you? Is it more important as a pro to focus on the clock and the opponents?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And you mean, like, by that, just getting the best out of yourself every race?
Right. So, like, I had one of my college coaches would say to me, like, run your race and the clock will take care of itself. So, like, he didn't want us focused on, like, obviously splits are important and racing is important, all those things, but the main focus is what he wanted was for us to focus inwards and make sure that we were giving the best that we could give on any given day. So that's kind of my inquiry, is like, is that how you focus, or is it more external now, kind of on the pro side?
I will say that when I'm in competition, late in competition, I can't help but to race my competitors or the clock. Like, I'm just such a competitor that I, especially in the end, like, I'm very good at pacing myself in the beginning for ultras, and but it's very difficult for me not to, I say, go hunting at the end, pick off people, and ultra running, like, it's a lot of men that I'm picking off.
Right.
And that I find that, that is very motivating. But in training, I'm only motivated and thinking about the race. I definitely focus on running my own race and my own training. And, that helps me. But I will also say that, I try and make the goal, especially now that I have had the opportunity to mature a little bit as a pro runner. Like, I get the best of myself out of every workout or every race. I tell myself that's the goal. And even if that means jockeying back and forth with someone else and, like, making it a goal, like, okay, I'm going to pass them back, or I'm going to hang on to this person, that still can be getting the best of yourself. And that's just using tools to get the best out of yourself. So, but, I think the key is instead to be happy. Like, you won't have a bad day if you gave 100% what you had, so yeah, I still approach races that way. And I mostly approach reflecting on races like that.
So I know you got a busy schedule, so I don't want to keep you too long. But as frequent listeners of the show will know, I have a question for each season that I ask every single guest. So I'll ask you just as I have every other guest this season. And you've got plenty of them, so I'm hoping you've got a good answer for this one. My question this season is, how do you celebrate your wins?
Oh, man. It really depends. I went through a phase where every time I won a race, I have celiac disease, and I love sugar and sweets. So I'd buy myself a giant cake. But
we're talking not gluten-free cake.
No, I'm talking about a real gluten-free cake.
Okay, like a really nice one. Okay.
If I eat gluten, I'm like dead. But if I eat gluten, I, like, react really poorly.
Okay,
but
I was like, I thought you were, like,
the point is,
trying to just, like, go off the rails and go, oh no, forget about it.
No, I wish though.
Okay.
My point, gluten-free cakes are like, to get a whole nice one, it's expensive.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I dropped like $50 on a cake. But now I think I celebrate with just like time off, like a week after, where I just like don't work and don't train, like that reset week. That is just, I like, so if I'm like thinking about dropping, I'm like, that week after will feel so terrible if I drop, so that's a huge way I celebrate.
Solid answer. Kat, if people want to follow you, get in touch with you, see what you're up to, any of that kind of stuff, where can they do that?
They can follow me on Instagram at catbrad is my Instagram handle. I'm pretty active on Strava these days, although I go in waves, and that's Cat Bradley. And I also am the brand manager at Method 7, which basically Method 7 Ultra Trail, which is like new sunglasses, and I basically just do creative for them. So I write my own personal blogs, and it's posted on their website. So that's been a really fun creative outlet for me. So check those out too at method7.com.
Awesome. Kat, I wish you luck on the rest of the season. It sounds like you've got things at least hopefully under control as you're spending time resting after wins, which is always nice. But thank you for joining me and for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is great. Yeah, thanks for joining me in my van.